franchising is more than just making sure they've got marketing stuff to use. It's sitting alongside your franchisees, understanding what's working well for them, what's not, where do they need help. Because my job, as far as I'm concerned, is twofold. Protect the brand. Second is make them successful or help them be successful. Most people who buy into franchises are looking for that support.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.
I'm Paul Spain, futurist and chief executive at Gorilla Technology. I love seeing individuals and their organisations thrive. The New Zealand Business Podcast is all about helping you learn from our most tenacious and effective leaders. Today, I'm joined by Dawn Engelbrecht, Chief Executive of Kitchen Studio, and a successful innovator and growth-focused leader in business, franchising, and governance. Dawn has built an impressive career across retail, education, and services, with deep experience scaling organisations and leading franchise networks, including SKids, from a single franchise into New Zealand's largest before and after school care provider, growing it into an international business operating across multiple countries. In 2023, what was meant to be a temporary role turned into a new chapter, with Dawn stepping in to lead Kitchen Studio. The New Zealand Business Podcast is brought to you by One New Zealand and Gorilla Technology. And before we jump in, if you work in a mid-size or smaller firm, I have a quick question. How confident are you that your organisation is appropriately leveraging AI and other technology, and that your house is in order from a cybersecurity perspective? If you're not fully confident, get in touch with Gorilla Technology for an advisory session. How are you today, Dawn?
Yeah, great, Paul. Thanks. Yourself?
Good. Well, thank you for coming into the studio. Now, I always like to start at the beginning and to hear a bit of the backstory. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where you were born.
Yeah, so I grew up in a little coal mining village in the UK called Kirkby in Ashfield. It means church in a field. And my dad worked down the mine since he was 14. And over the years, he trained up and upskilled to becoming a draftsman. But essentially, the other thing he did was he ran the local coal miners' welfare, which was basically a pub. So I grew up between a mom who was a stay-at-home mom and a dad who worked extraordinarily hard.
Quite a fascinating upbringing, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at diets, I'm Paul.
Good. And what are the things that stand out of that period in your life now when you look back, and can you see sort of certain areas that are very much connected to that period?
Yeah, possibly. I left home when I was 18. I literally finished my A-levels, and 2 days later I was on a flight out to South Africa because my childhood sweetheart, we'd been dating throughout the last couple of years of high school, had got a job in Johannesburg. So I went off to see him, and 2 days before I was supposed to fly home to go to uni, I phoned my mom and said, don't go to the airport, I'm not coming back. I have told my children that repeatedly to ensure that none of them did that to me.
How did it go down?
I think she saw it coming, to be fair. I think she was hoping the lure of uni would bring me back, but no, the fun was stronger. But I think context behind that as well, when in my later teenage years, was when there was the massive coal miners' strike in the UK, 1984. And yeah, that was a really tough time in the UK. It wasn't fun. My dad ended up out of work because the where he worked closed down, never reopened. So it really affected our local economy badly. And I think that probably instilled in me a little bit of that, make sure you can always look after yourself. Don't always, don't be reliant on somebody else. So yeah, it probably stemmed from there.
Yeah. And so what did South Africa look like for you?
Gosh. So when I first got there, obviously I was with this chap that I thought I was in love with. Pretty soon realised that, no, not really, as you often do at that age. But by that time, I'd fallen in love with Africa. It was a really fun time. There was a lot of expats mulling around Johannesburg at the time, and I moved into what was known as a commune, which conjures up different pictures for different people, but essentially it was a shared house. And it was a bunch of Zimbabweans that were living there, and that's where I met my husband. Yeah, so we spent a couple of years living not in that commune, but in another one until we got married. And yeah. But it was a fun place to be.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. And I mean, sometimes these sorts of things actually, play quite a big part into the next phase of life. How was that connected up? Obviously, finding your husband there is
that was quite a big step. Yeah,
the future.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we're still really good friends with everybody that we played with, lived with, associated with there. But also that's where I had a job at a TV repair company. Pretty soon, that was hilarious actually, because my boss was Scottish, and the one day he sat me down and he said, "Dawn, you either lose the accent or you're going to lose your job." And I remember looking at him going, "Really?"
That sounds a bit odd.
Yeah, because I had a very Midlands England accent. Anyway,
and what was his accent like?
It was very broad, very broad. Yeah, so I thought that was a little bit cheeky, but anyway, his business, his call. So I had to really force myself to drop my accent, which is why I've probably still got quite a good South African twang, because you pick something else up along the way. But, I really quickly realised that I didn't want to spend my life working at a TV repair company. And so I studied for my Bachelor of Commerce through what's UNISA, which is a correspondence university. And it took me 6 years, and along the way I had 3 kids and got there in the end.
Fantastic. That's great. And when you had completed that time, what was next?
Yeah, so I set up my own little accounting and bookkeeping company, and as luck would have it, I ended up picking up a couple of franchised restaurants as clients, and that was probably my first exposure to franchising. And I remember at the time thinking, gosh, this is a jolly clever idea. Everybody does the same thing. As a customer, you know what you're going to get. As the owner, you know what you're expected to do. Yeah, so that's probably where I got my first taste in franchising. But yeah, I spent, until we left, that's what I was doing.
Right. And those franchises that you came across, were they part of the international networks, local ones?
No, it was very much a South African-based franchise network. So yeah.
Yep. And anything that really sort of sticks with you in terms of the learnings during that period?
Yeah. So I'm going to age myself now, but at the time, so I used to go into each of the restaurants once a month, pick up all the till receipts, take them home, chuck them into a wonderful spreadsheet that I developed, and I was able then to report back to the franchisee and say, here's your GP percentage, here's this is working well, this is not working well. So it really gave me a good ability to learn how to benchmark. You learn these theories at uni, but it was a very practical benchmarking process. And a funny story from that time was I had a couple of these, they were keg and, so it's keg and barrel, keg and dog, keg and whatever. And I was doing the accounts for a couple of them, and the head office phoned me the one day and said, "Oh, we've heard about you, and one of our franchises is really struggling with their GPs. Can you go help them?" Sure, they were local. So off I trotted, met the franchisee, started doing the work. And I think it was either my second or third visit where I was reporting back. And as I'm walking through the pub, through the restaurant, to the back rooms, had to walk past the kitchen, and there's this almighty ruckus happening in the kitchen, and the doors are swinging, and it's like, okay, not sure what's going on here. Turns out it was the head chef, and he'd seen me coming through. He knew what my job was to look at the benchmarking. Unbeknownst to everybody, he'd been selling chickens out the back door, and this is why the GPs were out.
Ooh.
And he was legging it. All you saw was this chap on his apron strings legging it down the road because he thought I'd caught him out. I hadn't, but yeah, there you go.
Wow. And so how did that end up getting revealed?
Oh, yeah. So he obviously gave the game away, and so that forced us to go, hang on a minute. And the reality is, so it must have been my second visit there, I didn't actually have enough data to go, it's this line item. I was starting to build up a picture. It was like, okay, this is where it's going out of whack. But I hadn't quite got to that detail. So he saved me a lot of work.
Yeah. The guilt caught up with him.
Yeah, it was very funny.
Yeah. And I'm curious how you went out to build clients, because that's it's starting a small business is actually it's not easy. There's so many different hats that you have to wear.
Yeah.
You would have been across the accounting side for yourself.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. And
then all these other hats
like marketing
that aren't necessarily
and all
your
of this
normal
nonsense.
Yeah.
It was a lot of my business was referral based. So I started off with a lady who imported dresses from France and sold them.
How did you get that? How did you get a first client?
How did I get her? A friend of a friend.
Yeah.
It was. It was a friend of a friend who's like, oh, hang on a minute, Dawn's starting to do that sort of thing. You should have a chat. Yeah. And that was quite handy, actually, because every now and then she couldn't pay me, so I got some lovely dresses out of it.
There's a good arrangement.
Yeah. And then from her, she referred me to a gentleman who imported leather bags and wallets and that sort of thing. And that just grew from there. And then somewhere along the line, I got my first referral to one of these kegs restaurants. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Right. So it very much grew by word of mouth, as commonly does with
Correct.
small business when you do a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happened from there? Because you didn't stay in South Africa forever, obviously.
No, we didn't. By late 1999, early 2000, crime and violence had increased quite dramatically, particularly in Johannesburg. And I distinctly remember a conversation my husband and I had about, it was no longer going to be a matter of if one of us got attacked or hijacked, but when. There'd been a massive spate of them, particularly in our area. And I won't bore you with some of the horror stories, but there were some horror stories. And we ended up having to sit our daughter down, who was, she would have been 8 or 9 at the time, and just say, right, Emma, if Mommy pulls up at the gate and if there's a man with a gun, Mommy's going to ask him if you can take your brother and your sister, and you have to promise Mommy that you'll just walk down the street and not look back, knowing full well that Mommy's probably going to get shot.
Wow.
So they can get the car. That was a horrendous conversation to have with an 8, 9-year-old, yeah? And we sat that evening and went, I cannot believe that we've just had that conversation. That's ridiculous. And that's what started our journey. We wanted a better, safer life for our kids. That was the top and bottom of it. And we knew we'd have to start again. We knew it would be tough. Our house was fully paid. Our cars were fully paid. We had no debt. We were in a very comfortable position in Johannesburg, but it wasn't safe. Yeah.
So how hard was it to make that move and make that transition in terms of selling things up and starting a whole new life?
Yeah, it was a very challenging time. We were very fortunate. We sold our house very quickly, sold the cars very quickly. So I think from making that decision, I came over and did what we used to call the LSD trip, look, see and decide.
Yes.
And I stayed at a lovely bed and breakfast in Parnell and spent a couple of days, probably about a week and a half, just travelling around Auckland, visiting some employment agencies, looking at houses. And I went home and I said to Peter, yep, we can live there. That'll be good. Yeah. And that started our immigration process. And
how did it go down for your daughter?
Fortunately, she was at an age where, yes, she had friends at school, but she wasn't a teenager. so there wasn't those deep, meaningful relationships that you have to deal with when your kids are teenagers. So, yeah, the kids were actually fine. We made it a big adventure. We bought them all an army, like an army storage box, the kit box that you have at the end of your bed in the army. They all got one of those each. Painted their name on the top, and they were allowed to put whatever they wanted into that. That was their treasure chest to bring to Auckland. So we brought McDonald's toys all the way from Johannesburg. It was, good investment. But it was theirs. It was precious. And they've actually still each got their boxes today, and they use them to store probably McDonald's toys for their own kids now, I would suggest. Immigration took a while. There was a lot of work you had to do, and rightfully so. New Zealand does get to choose who comes in. I was the main applicant. Peter was the secondary applicant. And, we got it reasonably easily. We were young enough, educated enough, all of those good things. The next challenge came, so we booked our flights, everything was sold. And then South Africa had restrictions on how much money you could take out the country, which was interesting.
That sounds like a challenge after you've just cashed everything up.
Correct, yeah. So we just cashed everything up. So we were allowed $5,000 per person per year. That's all you were allowed to take out. So we cashed all of that up. We took fortunately, we could do $5,000 for each of the kids. So my 4-year-old son had his allocation.
Yeah.
We put it all in bum bags. Myself and Peter had a serious chunk of change wrapped around our bodies while we travelled.
Wow.
And we put the rest onto our credit card. And that's how we got our money out. It sounds awful, but that's what you had to do. And, then we got to New Zealand and we rented a house in what sounded like a really gorgeous place, Otara. And we then discovered that there was a thing called a tinny house. And, we had quite an adventure that first year with interesting neighbours. But, that's how we got started.
Yeah. Well, you've got to start somewhere, don't you? And, you figure these things out along
you do.
the
You
way.
figure these things out as you go along. Yeah.
So what did that first period, that first year look like in terms of, getting established and getting the family set up and getting into work at some point?
Yeah. So the silly thing was that we'd thought about everything except who was going to look after our children when school was closed, because it hadn't been an issue in South Africa. And so we enrolled our children at the local primary school, and they had an after-school care there, which was great. Perfect solution. There were 6 children attending, and 3 of them were mine. So being the stroppy person that I can be sometimes, I said to the lady that owned it, I said, listen here, I'm giving you half your profits. You need to sell this to me. And she did. And that was my very first SKids franchise. And I'm sad to say, as a qualified accountant, that was the sum total of my due diligence. The numbers just made more sense if it was mine. Very quickly discovered it was a great concept, very poorly run. So spent a few years working with the original franchisor, trying to, lift up standards, create some standards, processes, policies, all of those normal things. And then it got to a point where myself and one of the other franchisees, we just said enough's enough. We can't keep doing this. We're paying somebody else to do it. They're making money out of us and we're doing all the work, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so myself and Bev, who is my business partner, she was one of the other franchisees, we got together, got some legal advice, and shortly thereafter, we suddenly found ourselves as franchisors, which was really, really interesting.
So you've got to go into tell us a little bit about that behind the scenes there, the legal advice and how that all came about.
Yeah, so at the time there was 12 franchisees in the group, and we'd only ever met about 4 of them. So the original franchisor deliberately kept us apart. And I think it was because she knew that if we got our heads together, then she'd be in trouble. So myself and Bev contacted all of the franchisees and said, look, hey, this is what's happened. This is what we're doing. And we spent the first 12 months basically just reassuring everybody that it wasn't going to be more of the same. We genuinely wanted to make things better. We genuinely wanted to, to improve the system for everybody. And yeah, it worked,
So was the situation that the franchisor wasn't meeting their legal commitments in terms of operation?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I say, literally there was no policies, no procedures, no guidelines, no website for a long while. Yeah, you name it, it didn't exist.
And so did you, buy it out? Did you
There was a token payment.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I was in Israel when it all came together on a school trip with my husband. My husband was a secondary school teacher. So Bev went with our solicitor to the franchisor's home to collect, the stuff.
Yeah.
And it all fitted into an A4 paper box.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So that was the entirety of the business.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't full. Yeah.
And that wasn't because it was on a hard drive or anything.
No,
it was,
no, that was hard copies.
So that was it.
Yeah. So we had a very clean base to start with. And we were fortunate that the other franchisees, they were just happy that somebody was actually finally, taking control. So we had a lot of fun. I ended up carrying on working. So I was the business manager at the local secondary college. So clearly there was no money to pay wages. So I did that in the daytime, and at night was working on, putting all of this stuff in place that we so badly needed. So I think it was probably close to 4 years in before I finally took the plunge and stepped into it on a full-time basis.
Oh, wow. So that's a good chunk of time to be
burning the candle at both ends.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah. And over that period, what would you say are the things that those key founding achievements really? Because you're really starting it from scratch. Other than the fact that
we had a few people with our badge on. Yeah, exactly. I think one of the big things for us was we entered the franchise. So we started attending Franchise Association events, and we became members of the Franchise Association. I reckon that was probably one of the best decisions we ever made. Franchising community in New Zealand is phenomenal. They are so supportive, so welcoming. They advocate for franchising. And we were welcomed with open arms. And that was awesome. It really helped us learn how to be franchisors, because we knew what hadn't been there, but, what else were we not doing? So that helped us learn from others how to be good franchisors. And along the way, somebody said to us, you girls have done a fabulous job with this business. You should enter the awards. I'm like, us? Me? What? And so we did, and we won. And it was just incredible. We won our section. And honestly, I think, it's a highlight.
So up until the time of winning that award, you maybe just didn't recognise how well that you were doing?
Totally.
Did that change your mindset at that point?
It did. But, sometimes you're so busy doing, and I'm sure every business owner, every founder, every entrepreneur will get that. You're so busy in the weeds that you don't have time to look up. We all know the theory. We all know that, you should work on your business, not in it. But when you're in that incredible growth phase that we were in, it's hard. It's hard to step back. So I think taking the time to enter the awards was the first time that we'd actually stopped and gone, holy schmoly, look at what we've done. We're actually quite good at this. And it was just amazing recognition.
Fantastic. So walk us through, if you can, a little bit of what that growth journey looked like.
At one point, we were growing something like 30% year on year. I think we did that for about 10 years. It was it was crazy, and speed wobbles along the way were huge because, and I think one of the first learnings was It's easy to look back now, but, we didn't know what our ideal customer looked like. So our model was that we were based on site at the local primary school, and we rented space from the school, and it made it really safe for the kids. They walk out of the classroom into the school hall or whatever it is we were renting. And so off we went, and we were signing up all these schools left, right and centre. And I remember saying to somebody, we wanted it to be like the Hoover, for out-of-school care. Instead of people don't go and buy a vacuum cleaner, they go buy a Hoover. That's what we wanted. People to say, have you got a SKids program, not an after-school program?
Yes.
And I firmly believe we achieved that for a long time. But what we didn't understand, because the data just wasn't available, we were collecting this information as we went along, was that roughly 10% of the school population attends after-school care on any given day. Broadly speaking. We didn't know that. So we didn't know that some of these smaller schools that we were helping were never actually going to be financially viable. And that's okay if it's a strategic decision and you can afford to have, let's say, 2% of your cohort as basically charity cases, and I don't mean that in that way, but we didn't have that data. We were learning it as we went along. So
right.
that
so
was
there were
interesting.
A
fair few learning curves.
Bits of pain from those ones. So what did you do in that case if you've got to pay somebody to look after these kids after school and the actual return isn't enough to cover your costs? Or was that more on the side of a franchisee who had signed up for that and then they were very no doubt disappointed?
Yeah. So we would run the site first before we would sell it to a franchisee.
Okay.
So generally we would know if it was going to be viable or not. So that at least we were never doing that. We did have to make some tough calls, and we probably took too long to make them. Because it's a very personal service. You're looking after somebody's child. You know that by doing that, you're enabling somebody to stay in work or in full-time study. So to take that away, you're creating a problem for somebody. So we would try and merge a couple of locations together if geographically, if that made sense. If one had the biggest hall, put on, transport from one to the other. But there were some that had to go, unfortunately.
So what was your approach with dealing with that? How did you break that news to?
Yeah, so we always had to go to the school first because that was our contractual relationship.
Right.
And some of the schools were amazing. They went, okay, well, don't pay rent then. It's fine. If that helps, if that's going to keep it going, just don't bother about rent.
Wow.
But if they didn't make that call, then they were normally supportive. Schools are businesses, principals they're not silly. And, as long as you present the facts and you can show them what you've done and how you've tried to make it work, I don't think anybody lost it with us. And then with the parents, we just have to tell them,
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting about the schools, because I think, I don't know what it was like for you, but I can imagine there would have been a bit of fear of how's this going to play out, and depending on what agreements you had in place with them, potentially they could have come out and said, exactly. do what you like, but you owe us the next 6 months worth of rent and so on. But sometimes you don't get the positive response because you don't bother asking.
Yeah. So look, as I say, they were all very supportive, and they could see that we'd tried what we could do. So, yeah. And
walk us through the journey in terms of how you worked to grow your base of franchisees. What did that look like?
Obviously, lots of marketing and recruitment. A lady called Chris joined us in a business development role. She was Bev's sister-in-law, so that helped. And she was fabulous. So Chris would do all of the recruitment. She would walk the prospects through, what we were offering. We would always take a prospect to one of our bigger sites and get them to spend a few hours there. Because my philosophy was, I can teach you how to run a business. I can't teach you how to like children.
Yeah.
So, you could pick up really quickly, because everybody will tell you that they're in it for the kids. Put them with 60 or 80 of somebody else's children and you go, maybe I'm not in it for the kids. Yeah, so that was always a good filter. But Chris was really good at, working out who was going to be a good fit for us across the network. Yeah, so off we went.
And, how much did you have to, really sell them? And, what did it look like when you thought somebody didn't or wasn't going to fit? How did you address that? If, for instance, they were keen to sign up, anyway and come on board as a franchisee.
Yeah. So we never talked about selling franchises. We grant franchises. So that decision was ours, not the buyer's.
Great.
Yeah. So, and we were always very upfront, that it was important for us to make sure that we were going to take on people who were going to be successful. You can't always get it right. Sadly, there was one or two that it didn't work for, no matter what we did. And generally, to be fair, was probably some of the earlier franchisees, if I'm honest. But we were very clear right from the beginning that final decision was always ours, not theirs. Yeah, and not everybody liked that, but that's okay. Yeah.
Were you also finding franchisees coming through folks that maybe would work for you if you have a location that would come through naturally that way?
We allowed our franchisees to be multi-site owners. They could have up to 3. So that helped with some of the initial growth. Also, what we found was a lot of our franchisees were actually referrals from our existing franchisees. So they were already sold. We didn't have to sell because they knew Susie or Fred was running a business. They were having a blast, making a nice income out of it. Nobody's ever going to get rich out of childcare. I don't care what, you're not doing it well if you've got to invest money into the systems, the processes, the resources for the kids. But you can make a reasonable living out of it. And we were always transparent about that as well. Yeah.
And how was it structured in terms of fee structures and so on? And was that something you got any pushback on? Or?
No, absolutely not. So it was just a percentage of their income, very typical franchising. And we didn't have a marketing levy. That's probably something I should have done, but we didn't. So be it. But yeah, so it was just a percentage of the income that they received, and that's what they paid. So made it fair across the group. It didn't matter if you were the biggest or the smallest, percentage-wise, it was always the same. It also meant that when COVID hit, nobody was paying fees. Good for them, not that good for us.
No. So how did that ultimately play out then?
We had resources that we could call on. So we were fine. We didn't let anybody go. Everybody took the 20% drop, and we rode it out. And we made sure all of our franchisees could do the same thing. And yeah, it was. I'm not saying it was fun, but we rode it out.
Yeah, well done. And then what ultimately happened with SKids? There was a sale.
Yeah, there was a sale. Yeah, so we'd had by this time, we're talking 20 odd years later, we'd grown it. So we had grown to 58 franchisees and 183 locations across the country.
Wow!
I know.
So most of them were taking up the opportunity to have multiple franchises.
Yeah. So we had incredible growth. We really did. So, yeah, that was a lot of sites across the country. But at some point, I'm trying to remember what year it was. It was about 2016, I think. I started on the international development of the business. So one of my goals had always been world domination in childcare. That was up on my wall.
Fantastic.
You got to put something out there to make it happen. And so obviously first step was Australia. So we set up in Australia, then we went to England, Ireland, Canada and South Africa. We did try Singapore, but it was just too hard. Their regulations were just really challenging. But yeah, so we set up in all of those countries.
And what did you find? What were the differences compared to operating in New Zealand, and how easy was it to transfer, and how much did you really need to reshape and look at local regulations, local approaches, and so on to actually be able to make it work in different countries?
I think going to Australia first set us up really well, because they are really good at creating red tape. So
it's not something to be too proud of.
No, it's not. So they've got probably the toughest franchise regulations in the world. So I was fortunate. We had really good legal advice that helped us with the franchise paperwork. And then as far as the localization of what we did, essentially what we did was we appointed what's called a country master franchisee, so somebody who's responsible for that country, and we worked with them collaboratively to adapt our resources to suit the local environment.
Right. And how did you find that person or that entity to do that for? Well, let's start with Australia.
I met her at a trade show.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a New Zealand trade show. She was over from Australia doing something else. We got chatting, and eventually she's like, I really need to do this. So, that's how that one got started, and that went really well. And then the next one was, where was the next one? England. That was from some very simple marketing in a magazine. And the gentleman there...
this is in a franchise sort of magazine?
Yeah, franchising magazine. Yeah. He liked what he saw. He came over to New Zealand, spent a couple of weeks with us here, went over to Australia to have a look at what we were doing there, and went, yep, I'm in. So that was the next one. South Africa was very similar. The lady there had just done her MBA, and she'd done a thesis on basically what was next in education and childcare. And that's how she found us and went, we don't have this in South Africa, not in a formalised basis. So Genevieve was the next cab off the rank. Fabulous lady, really, really smart cookie, very, very clever lady. And then Ireland was the next cab off the rank, John. Yeah, and then Canada. Yeah.
And was there in each of those markets, were they similar to South Africa, where there wasn't something similar, or were you going up against some existing things?
Yeah, England, franchising in England's very simple. I could literally meet you in a cafe and sign you up. It's very poor. And that's why you end up with cowboys sometimes in that environment. But their regulations were quite tough, although... at the time, New Zealand had a ratio of 1 staff member to every 10 children, with a minimum of 2 staff on duty at any given time. It's quite a heavy wage bill if you start thinking about it. England was 1 staff member for every 30 children.
Oh, wow, that's night and day.
And they could be sole charge.
Wow.
Now, you imagine that.
So that's quite a different model from
absolutely. So we basically said, okay, well, we'll follow your regulations for everything else except that, and we're bringing our standard in as far as staffing ratios go. So that immediately set us apart from the competition. South Africa, it was very informal what was happening. So they do have franchising regulations, but nothing too onerous. And there was definitely no childcare regulations at the time. So they really enjoyed having something that they could, follow and set a standard with. So that was good.
And did that have an impact down the track in terms of legislation sort of, coming in that it influenced?
It's lifted standards. And I mean, we lifted standards here. So, when we built our processes and whatever, we actually looked around to see what was happening internationally. And, typically what happens in New Zealand is whatever's happening in Australia, it filters down here at some point in time. So we actually built everything we did on the Australian standards up front. So when we started, the only regulation that was in place was that you had to have 1 person with a first aid certificate on staff.
Oh, really?
That
in
was
New Zealand?
In New Zealand. So
Wow.
that was the regulation when we started. That has totally changed, I'm very happy to say. And it's very much more regulated, and it's really good. Yeah.
And what was the opportunity in terms of the scale and the different markets? Where did you see the best or the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, good question. I mean, Australia had a massive opportunity, but there were some big players, and what happened probably within a couple of years of us launching there was the private equity groups started buying up some of the bigger players, which made it so much harder to compete because they've got very deep pockets, as we know. But we still did pretty well. I think at the time when we sold, we had about 40 locations that we were running there. England was a massive opportunity, really was. But unfortunately, the manager that we put in place there wasn't the best. But they were getting stuff done slowly but surely. But it tended to be very much around London and just Greater London. It didn't really get much further than that.
So you didn't get the
growth that we
you
needed
would
there.
have liked.
Yeah. And South Africa went off like great guns. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned some challenges with Singapore. Tell us about that in terms of how far did you go, and how soon did you realise that was going to be a challenge?
Yeah, so we appointed country master franchisees. I spent 2 or 3 trips over to help them get going. Their regulations, so basically everything there was tender based, and once you'd won the tender, it was yours for 3 years. So if you missed that opportunity, it was going to be 3 years before you got another look in.
And that was what, on a basis of each
on every
individual
location,
school?
yeah. And when we engaged with that couple, the gentleman, the husband, was supposed to be the driving force, and he would have been fabulous. And the wife was going to do the behind the scenes stuff. And then he got offered a very lucrative contract, which he accepted, which was fine. I mean, it's his life, his choice. But that meant that his wife was supposed to now be the face of the business, and clearly it wasn't her skill set. So we gave it probably about 8 or 9 months trying to help her upskill, and she just hated it. And I get that, if that's not your thing, it's very, very hard to get up and go and be the business development person when you actually like just doing admin.
When you saw those things like that happen, and it didn't go the way you're expecting, how do you deal with that?
Just an honest conversation.
Yeah.
And fortunately, when we did setting up new countries, yes, there was a fee for the license, but we staged it. So there would be a fee that incorporated use of IP and training. Then the next one kicked in when they got their first location, and then there was like a staggered payment. So for that instance, they'd only paid for what they'd got. So it was no win, no foul.
Yeah. A fascinating journey. Then COVID came. Was that part of the trigger to sell?
Fortunately, we'd sold just before that.
Okay. Good timing.
So I know, timing's everything. So we sold in March 2019. At the time when the sale was signed, the plan was for me to do international business development, so to stay on and do that. We had a general manager in place for the New Zealand business, and obviously the country masters were looking after everything else. But then, of course, early 2020 was when everything went pear-shaped, and the general manager that we had in place in New Zealand, for various reasons, chose to step away from the role. So the group that bought us asked me to step in as GM for a transition period, which I think worked really well for the franchisees through COVID. They had a familiar face, somebody they knew, they trusted, who I knew them, they knew me. And that, I think that ended up working out really, really well through that period. By the time we got through that period and got to the end of it, I had an honest conversation with the group CEO, and I said, look, I know, because we had recruited a new GM for New Zealand.
Yes.
And I just said, look, I know that technically you have an obligation to me to give me a job and to do this, But the reality was there was not going to be any international development for a number of years coming out of COVID. So I said, I'm happy to walk, and I did.
Now, let's go back to selling the business, because this is something that is often easier said than done.
Yep.
What was your approach to putting the business on the market?
We didn't. We never advertised it. So we'd had approaches over the years, and early on, as we grew and grew and grew, it became very clear that there was not going to be anybody in New Zealand, or very few people in New Zealand, that would be in a position that could buy us, So we knew that the approach would most likely come from Australia, somebody wanting to expand. And I got a random phone call the one day. I was actually in Melbourne visiting my daughter.
Okay.
And I got a random phone call from this lovely Irish lady to say, I represent this group, and, we'd like to chat to you about, maybe buying your New Zealand business. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I happened to be in Melbourne. She was in Melbourne. Let's get together for coffee. And I said, you do know that this other brand, because the international stuff was under a second brand. I said, you do know that I own Sherpa Kids as well as SKids. And she went, oh, do you now? And we probably, and obviously it wasn't my decision solely. We had Bev as a business partner in New Zealand. And by that time, Chris, our business manager, had also invested in the New Zealand business. So there was multiple people who had to go on the journey. But we realised that they're called Junior Adventures Group. Their focus was on childcare, but specifically the out-of-school care sector. They understood our world. They knew that it's not an environment where you can strip all the costs out just to make money. They were a really good fit for us. So we reached an agreement.
That's fantastic. And being an accountant, I'm sure you would have, had your head around how to do the valuation. But what can you, share with us around valuing the business and coming to a mutual number that you could agree on from both sides?
So fortunately, because they understood our world, they'd already got multiples and factors that they were using. But what they didn't understand fully was the franchising aspect. So that was the educational bit that we had to do for them. And just to basically, because it's like, hang on a minute, but they're also SKids, or they're also Sherpa Kids, but you don't own them. And, how does this work? So we spent some time, I spent some time modelling for them what it looked like. But then what we did was we actually went to our accountant, which was Grant Thornton at the time, and they did some modelling for us, because obviously I can model to my heart's content, but, nobody's going to pay for Dawn's version of the world. So we agreed mutually that they were happy with Grant Thornton doing the modelling, and they basically put together how they saw the growth. If the growth continued in the way that we believed it would, and there was no reason to think it wouldn't, then that would be a fair valuation, and they accepted it.
Well, can you share anything with us on that?
Not really,
no.
If it was just mine, I would, but there was other people involved. But nobody was upset.
Yeah, that's good. That's the sort of outcome you're looking for.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you've built a great business, international business. You've sold it.
Yeah.
Was that enough?
Well, that was the theory. So I was exhausted, if I'm honest, by that stage. So what was happening, I was doing the New Zealand business during the day and then supporting internationally at night. So here we go again, working all hours that God sent and a few more. And I like to be busy, but there's busy and there's busy. So I was exhausted. So at first it was like, finished. And then it was like, okay, my first grandchild had been born by this stage. It's like, cool, I'll be a granny. I'll just potter around, and when I'm needed. Well, that got very boring very quickly.
I can imagine so.
And a colleague of mine through franchising was a director at Link Business Broking, Nick, and he said, you should come and sell businesses, Dawn. You'd be great at it. I'm like, Nick, I've never sold a thing in my life. He said, of course you have. He says, you get your kids to brush their teeth, you can sell anything. Okay, all right. So I got my qualifications and I did that for a couple of years and it was great fun. But also what I did was I took on a couple of independent director roles. And that's where my association with Kitchen Studio began.
Ah, fantastic. Now, in this business broking work, you must have, seen some really interesting things in terms of the different businesses you interacted with, in terms of how they were valued, how the deals were done. What can you share with us?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of accountants out there that really should not advise their clients on what the value of their business is, because if I heard once, you just take the bottom line and you multiply it by 3 or 4 and that's what it's worth. No, it's not. There's all sorts of factors involved. What industry is it in? How long has it been operating? What sort of lease is in place? What is the staffing complement? Are you the be all and end all for your business? The number of times I looked at businesses where, the owner was everything to the business.
Right. You couldn't really separate the owner from the business.
Absolutely. And, that's a very dangerous place to be, not just from a business sale perspective, but from a business continuity perspective. So I did find myself actually educating a lot of small business owners on, things that they should be putting in place before they go to market, which obviously meant, I didn't necessarily get the sale there and then, but I did have people coming back to me and saying, right, Dawn, we've done what you told us to do. Now we can go to market. Because, if you think about it, if it's a husband and wife team, and maybe they've got Susie who does reception, but maybe the wife does all the accounts, the husband does all of the sales, or if it's a hands-on, he does all of that. What is the buyer thinking? I'm going to give you a check, John, and then you and Mrs. Jones are going to walk out the back door, and who's going to run the business? Who's going to do all of the doing? And unless they come with the same skill set, then you've got a problem, and there goes your value. Whereas if you can have teams in place and you can say, well, actually, I do this much, I do 10% of it, and Fred does this, and Susie does that, and John does that, then the buyer goes, man, that's a good business, and they pay more for it.
What were the typical business, and what was sort of the range in terms of values and scales in terms of people? So
the businesses that I worked with, they could be anything from, I think the smallest one I sold was, I think we sold it for about $30,000. And the biggest one was just shy of $2 million. So there was the whole gamut along the way. So we are a country with a lot of one-man bands, and they are very hard to sell because, obviously everything does revolve around the owner. And the other thing we saw quite often coming through was people who had really left it that little bit too late for their retirement. So, maybe 5 years ago they had a thriving business, but as life, age, health, whatever had started to affect them, of course it affected their business. So the value of their business was being eroded every year before they sold, which is such a shame.
Yeah. So sometimes exiting early, even though you're not going to be earning necessarily in the business over that period, you actually might get more than if you had stayed working.
Yeah, because what happens is the buyer looks at it and goes, well, yeah, I can see it used to do that, but the last 5 years it's not come close, so I'm going to pay you for the last 3 years average, not what it used to do and not what you tell me it could do, because the could has to be done by the new owner. So they're only going to pay for recent history, basically.
And what did you find was the typical state of systems, processes, technology platforms?
Yeah, all over the place. There's some small businesses out there with really great processes, they've thought about it, and then there's some bigger businesses out there with horrendous processes or none at all. And, there's still the those that put personal expenses through their business, and, I know a lot of small businesses do that. But if you're going to paint your entire house and put it through as a business cost, you got to know.
What?
You know, I mean,
Surely not.
yeah, we did. We had one. And unfortunately for him, I'd sold a similar business not too much earlier. And I'm looking, like, these numbers are just not making sense to me. And eventually I sat him down and I said, look, I'm not the tax man, but you just need to tell me what's going on here, because what I'm seeing, what I know I should be seeing, this is not making sense. Then he got all really like, oh, well, yeah, I did paint my house last year and I spread it across the business and I did this and I did that. I'm like, okay, now you need to go back to your accountant and see if he's prepared to redo your accounts, refile your tax, and then I can do an appraisal for you.
Well, you'd get a better result anyway from the business side if you're selling it, if you've actually been honest.
Totally, so I mean, if you think if it's a 3 times multiplier, and if you've just chucked $30,000 through your business, you're multiplying something 30,000 less than what you could have been. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like an actually amazing opportunity.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. And then taking on board roles as well?
Yeah, I've enjoyed that, and I still have a couple of board roles. I'm on the board of Beds R Us, and I'm on the board of a company called Taxi Charge, which is a payment gateway service for taxi businesses. Yeah, so I do enjoy my board roles, and it's a way of giving back. Yeah.
What brought to an end your period of business broking?
The CEO at Kitchen Studio left in a bit of a hurry.
Okay.
And the board needed somebody to step in. And I'm like, didn't run fast enough.
It didn't interest you immediately?
To be honest, it did.
Yeah,
it did.
yeah.
I kept looking and going, man, I'd love to get my teeth into this. So I took on the role. It was supposed to be for 6 months, and I've been there nearly 3 years.
Wow. And so what was it that initially got you excited and interested in the opportunity? What were the things that you saw from the get-go?
I love franchising. I think it's a fabulous way of doing business if it's done well. And there was just a few elements that I could see that it just wasn't being done as well as it could have been done, like in the franchise support area and that sort of thing. And I'm just like, man, they've got such a great bunch of people in this group, but they're just not getting what they need out of the support office. Yes, they got marketing and that sort of thing, but franchising is more than just making sure they've got marketing stuff to use. It's sitting alongside your franchisees, understanding what's working well for them, what's not, where do they need help, and can you give them that help, or do you have to find somebody to give them that help? Because my job, as far as I'm concerned, is twofold. Protect the brand. That's my first job. So protect the brand. Second is make them successful or help them be successful. Take horse to water, make them drink. But most people who buy into franchises are looking for that support. They don't want to be doing business on their own. They want somebody walking alongside them. So, that was my first goal, is like get around them, find out what do they need, what do they want, what's working, what's not working, and let's move it from there.
And you had the existing knowledge on the business from being a director.
Which helped. Yeah.
So, you weren't coming into something
I wasn't in
blind.
cold. Yeah.
And so maybe you can just give us a quick overview of what the business actually does and what it looked like at that point.
So what we do is we design beautiful kitchens. We get them manufactured and we install them for you. But we also project manage the whole process.
What did you find when you actually stepped in to lead the business in terms of what was that like? Yep. Was there a little bit to do or a lot?
There was a lot to do.
Yeah.
There was a lot to do. The manuals hadn't been updated since I think it was 2006. So there was a lot of that sort of stuff needed to be done. And look, to be fair, they hadn't been selling franchises either. So their growth had been very stagnant from a franchise growth perspective. But a good franchise system should always be growing. Not necessarily new locations, but you need new blood. You know, you need to help people be excited, get a good return on their investment, and then go off and do something else. And that's what keeps it alive and vibrant. And, you know, one of our franchisees had been with us for 38 years, another one's 37, you know, so there's a lot of long-term franchisees in there, which is great from a knowledge perspective, but it's not fresh energy coming into the group. And there's a balance there somewhere. So lots of work from a systems and process perspective. But the biggest one was the actual way we were doing business. So we take the old kitchen out, get the area ready, put the new one in, clean up on the way out. Sounds really simple. The back-end process to make that happen was horrendous. So we have this fabulous drawing software that designs the kitchens, and we can give you a 3D render, and we can do all of that. Unbeknownst to the franchisees, when they pressed the button to order the kitchen, which at that time came through to support office, they thought that that would generate an order that would miraculously feed into a system at support office, and then that did something else miraculously and ordered all the component bits from the suppliers. No. It generated a rather large spreadsheet that landed on the desk of a couple of ladies in the office who would then have to break it down into its component parts, order it from the various manufacturers or suppliers, and then there was just this massive merry-go-round of paperwork. So they were confirming orders from the franchisees, issuing purchase orders to the suppliers, receiving invoices from the suppliers, paying that, on-billing it to the franchisee. Oh my goodness, it was just awful. And two things came out of that. So one was I realised really quickly it was going to be the biggest barrier to our growth, because we were either going to have to keep throwing headcount at it, or we were going to have to invest in some serious technology, because it was just so labour intensive. But the other thing was, because they were basically buying from us, we were putting our markup on up front. So on more than one occasion, by the time we'd put our markup on, the franchisee wasn't as competitive in the marketplace as they could have been, because it was an inflated cost. And so if they wanted to get the sale, they could discount to their heart's content. But we always got our full clip.
Right.
And they took the brunt of any discount. That felt a little bit unfair. Mm-hmm. So we modelled what could it look like if we turned it into a traditional franchise system, whereby they buy direct from the supplier and then they just pay a levy on their sales, and we could see that it would work for them, it would work for us. We had to talk to our suppliers because we had payment guarantees with all the suppliers.
Yes.
And so we spent 6 months travelling around the country, sitting with each franchisee individually to make sure that they were really clear about what that change would look like, sitting with our suppliers to make sure they were really clear with what it would look like. And on the 1st of April 24, I think it was, we flipped to the new model. And it was interesting in the beginning. You know, there was a few teething issues, there always will be. But now everybody is 100% confident that if they have to discount to get the sale, we all share the pain. They are 100% confident that they're getting the best buy price based on our national volumes, and it's been a smooth transition from there on.
Wow, well done. How clear was it that you needed to make that move and that change? Was it
Abundant.
something that was really hurting everybody?
Yeah, it was. It was hurting everybody, not the least the girls in the office. It was one step away from modern slavery. It was awful. You know, they literally spent their entire days, head down, bum up, just moving papers around, basically. It was awful. It must have been a horrible job.
And so working through this process, when you look back, how much difference has that sort of, made over the last, couple of years since you put that in place?
So we've reduced our headcount by 50%. So that's been huge.
At a head office.
At a head office perspective. Yep. We also, during that period, transitioned most of our branches from We used to buy the kitchens essentially as flat packs from our manufacturers, and then the franchisee would assemble them in warehouses that they had themselves and then install it in the customer's home. We now get all of our kitchens fully assembled from our manufacturers. We've got 4 manufacturers around the country, so whatever you want, we can make. And so the franchisees not only get a better upfront buy price, basically, they've managed to reduce their own running costs by getting rid of warehousing that they no longer need and all of that sort of thing. So I think it's made a fundamental difference to whether they're still here or not, quite frankly.
That's fantastic. And, how much coverage do you have around the country? What does that look like?
At the moment, we've got 16 showrooms. We've got 2 more opening, hopefully by the end of this month. And my next big project that I'm working on is I've got a goal of having 45 showrooms by 2030.
Wow, that's quite a target, Dawn.
It is quite a target, isn't it? There you go. Yeah. But there's a plan behind the target.
Yeah, okay. And so what do you think are the biggest challenges ahead?
Getting good locations at a fair price is always interesting. Getting the right people in. So
You mean in terms of physical real estate?
Physical real estate, yeah. So a lot of our showrooms are quite large at the moment, which of course means rental costs are quite high. What we have proposed to the franchisees, they've all got really large territories, is for them to have one hero showroom in their territory and then have 4 or 5 satellites around the rest of their territory that maybe only has 1 or 2. So it might be 90 square metre footprint instead of 150 square metres. So that's how we're going to help them do it. Yeah,
fantastic. Now, you're responsible for a lot of people's livelihoods. What are the techniques that you apply to help each one of them achieve their best?
Yeah, good question, because everybody needs something different. Yeah. So one of the things I always do, if somebody walks into my office, the first thing I do is I close my laptop, because I want them to know that I'm there and I'm listening. But also I travel around the country, so 3 or 4 times a year I'm in front of individual franchisees, talking to them about what's working, what's not working, what else can we help them with. I've got an operations manager, Mark, who is fabulous. So he also travels around the country from a support and training perspective. He's an ex-designer. Well, not ex, he'll never stop designing, but so he does a lot of training with our designers. He used to teach design for NKBA, so he's very, very good at that. So he helps from a technical perspective. I come in and help from a business perspective, and it seems to be working. We've got a very good culture now.
And what does it look like for somebody to, enter in and say join Kitchen Studio, either taking over an existing franchise or
a greenfields?
Maybe
Yep. So we got a couple of greenfields available. In fact, if you know anybody in Queenstown or Wanaka, they really need to talk to me, because I desperatly need somebody there.
That's a good market too. You might just find somebody listening
Exactly.
Thinks they've hit the gold mine, and they may have done.
Yeah, it's honestly, we're desperate to get somebody in there. But basically, you've got an upfront fee of about $150K. That covers your access to the IP, the use of the brand forever, and as long as you're a franchisee, your training. We are a cooperative style franchise, so what that means is that every franchisee owns a share in Kitchen Studio. So that's slightly different. It means that I have got 16 bosses around the country, but that's okay. So it includes everything from that perspective. Then we help you find premises. We've got fabulous agreements with our suppliers where they will contribute quite significantly to the showroom fit out. It's not free. And there will always be things like lighting, flooring, painting that you're going to have to budget for. But, we'll help you design your first showroom, help you recruit your designers, and just get you going.
And what about the process of selling and delivering a kitchen. I remember a discussion with someone who's done this sort of thing in the past as part of building work and so on. And sometimes you would get customers that are like, that's not what I wanted, or varying challenges, whether it's that they're upset or they refuse to pay the bill or those sorts of things. So how does it all fit together, and how do you minimize the pain that can come? I guess because the business has been around a long time. You've got these things down to quite a fine art. Yeah,
we do. 43 years this year, so it's quite a long-standing system. We come out to your home. We do all of the measuring ourselves. We don't rely on somebody else to do the measuring. But I think the main thing is, so we actively, our designers are fabulous. Yeah, so they're very well trained. You come into the showroom, you choose the benchtop that you want, you choose the cabinetry that you want, all of that. You get a 3D render so you know visually what it's going to look like. But quite honestly, if something's not right, we put it right. So we have a 10-year guarantee on all of our cabinetry and all of our product. We've got a guarantee on your deposit. So if, heaven forbid, you paid it as a deposit and something happened to the franchisee, we guarantee you're still going to get your kitchen. We sort it out. But we also have incredible relationships with our suppliers. And funnily enough, just before I came today, we've got a client who ordered a specific benchtop. The benchtop that's arrived is not right. Absolutely. Mark, my operations manager's had a look at the photos. Totally, we all agree that's not what we expected. He's already onto the supplier to say, mate, this needs to be put right now. Yeah. And it will get put right because we have really good relationships with those suppliers and they want our business. But we don't take the mickey either. So if the customer has changed their mind,
yes, it can happen.
And it's already been ordered, that's not the supplier's problem, So that's for us to sort out. Can we resell it? What can we do? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But if it's a genuine warranty issue or a product issue, then they will stand by it.
Yeah. That's great. We're probably running out of time now, so maybe there are one or two sort of practical tips that you can share for those that are listening in. What are the things that you will often recommend to the business owners, franchisees that you deal with that can really make a difference?
I think the most important thing that any business owner can do is you must know your numbers. You cannot wait until the end of the financial year to go, did I make a profit or did I not? And you'd be surprised how many small businesses and bigger businesses do that, or they wait until the month-end accounts come out, which, the bigger the business, the longer that's going to take. So that's one thing I'm very strong on with my team is they must know their numbers. They must understand that if they discount, what is that doing to their profit? Where is that flex? Because it's very easy to say, I'll take 10% off or 20% off. That has a flow-on effect, and you may end up doing the job for free. Well, why would you do that? Do you love them that much? So that's one thing, know your numbers. Secondly, you have to have a crocodile skin when you're in business. You've got to be tough. You might not be tough on the inside, but you've got to find a way that nobody likes confrontation or conflict. Very few people do. But if somebody owes you money, you have to be strong enough to say, excuse me, but we have a contract here. I've done my bit. You now need to do your bit. And if you don't do your bit, these are the consequences. We're quite fortunate at Kitchen Studio. We get paid in full before the installation happens, so bad debts are not necessarily something we deal with. But at SKids, it was often a problem, and when you're having to look at evicting somebody's child from your program because mom hasn't paid, that's really not very nice because you actually quite like little Johnny. He's lovely. It's mom and dad that's the issue. They haven't paid their bill. But that's where that crocodile skin has to come in. because they're not your kids, or it's not actually your problem. You can't let it be your problem. So I think that's, and always ask questions. You don't know everything. So I'm a sponge. I'm always listening, learning, asking questions. I enjoy it.
And did it take you, a long time to learn to deal with those tough situations, whether it's somebody not paying a bill or what have you? How did you,
You get burnt.
Yeah,
you get burnt. So, the quicker you learn from some of those things, the better, and fortunately the burns that I got were never that bad. But, and the other thing I did learn along the way, because obviously within franchising and within a lot of business, there's always something legal, some piece of paper that's legal. What I did learn was don't assume that your solicitor has necessarily checked everything. That cost me quite a bit of money the once. I thought he'd checked. He hadn't checked. He thought I'd checked. And there was a signature missing that really made a difference. So that was the other learning I had was, yes, you pay them, and it was resolved second to that, but you pay people to help you in your business, but you are still responsible for your business. So you never fully abdicate the responsibility for everything to anybody. As the business owner, you're still responsible.
And I guess both businesses across Kitchen Studio and SKids, you had boards.
Mm-hmm.
What did they look like, and how important was that?
Yeah, it was really helpful. So with SKids, we had what they call an advisory board, because it was myself, Bev, and Chris. We were the directors, and we had an external chairman who joined us, and he was great. He really was. He challenged us, he pushed us, and but he kept us accountable, and he kept us in a really solid reporting rhythm, and which was great. So we had a lot of big business practices well before we became a big business. So that was great. At Kitchen Studio, we've got a board of 5. So there's 3 franchisee shareholders who are directors, and 2 independents. And again, it's just really solid discipline. Because again, you're so busy in your business, you've got to find ways to stop and work on the business. And having a board really, really helps you to do that.
That's fantastic. Anything else you'd like to add, Dawn?
No, I think I've told you my whole life story.
Well, there's a lot that's packed up in there. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Well, I trust you enjoyed hearing from Dawn Engelbrecht. The New Zealand Business Podcast was brought to you by One New Zealand and Gorilla Technology. Be sure to listen in to our other episodes featuring many of New Zealand's most successful leaders, including founders such as Sir Peter Beck of Rocket Lab, Brooke Roberts of Sharesies, Cecilia Robinson of My Food Bag, Sir Michael Hill, and many more. And if you benefited from this episode, be sure to share it with a friend. And before we go, if you do work for a mid-size or smaller firm, I wonder how confident are you that your organisation is appropriately leveraging AI and other technologies, and that your cybersecurity posture is solid. If you're not fully confident, get in touch with Gorilla Technology for an advisory session. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. This is Paul Spain signing out, and I will catch you on the next episode. See you then.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.